This project allows these local governments to actually have a lever to pull to hopefully affect the quality of service with whatever partners come to the table and make the most sense.
Welcome to episode 406 of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. This is Jess Delfiaco, Communications Manager here at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. Today, Christopher talks with John Stavney, Executive Director of the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments, as well as Evan Biaggi, Executive Vice President of Business Development for Mammoth Networks. Christopher, John, and Evan talk about Project THOR, which was established by a group of Colorado communities who decided to band together in order to reduce costs and improve connectivity. THOR provides middle-mile service so communities can engage in a variety of solutions to suit their unique local needs. They discuss how Project THOR has evolved and how Mammoth Networks has been involved in the project. John and Evan also tell Christopher about some of the engineering and funding challenges of working to develop a regional network with multiple communities. Now here's Christopher talking with John Stavney and Evan Biaggi about Project THOR.
Welcome to another episode of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. I'm Christopher Mitchell with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, and I'm speaking today with two patient guests, John Stavney, the Executive Director of the Northwest Colorado Council of Governments. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Christopher. Great to be here.
Wonderful. And we also have Evan Biaggi, the Executive Vice President of Business Development for Mammoth Networks. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me.
And thank you both for your patience. We just did a great introduction, and I forgot to record it. So we're gonna do that same thing again now. Mammoth Networks it's a wonderful, large wireless and fiber optic network in the West. But for people who want to know a lot more about it, we did an interview with Brian last year at the Mountain Connect conference, one of the wonderful events for broadband gatherings in the entire country, which will unfortunately be postponed this year, like so many other things. But let me just start, Evan, let me ask you to give me a 30-second sketch of what Mammoth does.
Sure. So Mammoth Networks is traditionally a middle mile aggregator of broadband services. And we've focused quite a bit on providing resilient and backup type middle mile connections to more rural areas than urban. We focus in the New Mexico, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana markets more than anywhere else. And we provide backhaul services. We take bits and pieces from various carriers and stitch them together in very unique ways. So we like to take on some of the more difficult and hard to get to areas and come up with solutions for them.
And you are working with a variety of partners. John Stavney with Northwest COG, the Council of Governments, which I think it's a wonderful approach in Colorado of keeping regional local governments coordinated. John, you're the one that actually owns Project THOR. And why don't you tell us a little bit about what Project THOR is going to be, is actually already doing. I think of it as the Hunky Hunky Network, named after one of my favorite series of movies.
Right, or Norse gods, right?
Right. I mean, I suppose pop culture or, sort of thousands of years of culture, but I go for the pop culture.
There you go. Project THOR. It's not an acronym. But so Northwest COG, Council of Governments, we've been around since the early 70s. The state of Colorado, like many states actually, has these regional organizations that are, represent local governments and deliver services. So we have a variety of different services that we deliver across the mountainside of central Colorado. We're just on the other side of Rocky Mountain National Park from Fort Collins and Boulder and Denver, and serve for a lot of your listeners who may know a little bit of Colorado, Summit County, Eagle County, Pitkin County, Grand County, and Jackson County, which contain Winter Park Ski Resort, Aspen, Breckenridge, Vail, among others. So we have a number of services that we've provided over the years. We're the Agency for Aging, providing funding for senior services. We inspect elevators across the region. And we have a business loan fund and do weatherization. That's low-income qualified. So a basket of different services that make more sense at a regional level than at a local level. And we've been involved in broadband for about 6 years or so. stretching back a little bit further than that to the conversation about broadband, we've had a number of our member jurisdictions, towns and counties, who have been involved in local broadband projects for some time. Top of mind, Vail, which has hosted very large events, as you might guess, has a municipal wireless network to bring in tens of thousands of people and be able to allow communications and have these large events. And they've been doing that for many years. Steamboat Springs, which is also at the northern end of our region, has been doing local broadband for roughly the same amount of time, almost a decade, really. And then you've got Glenwood Springs, which has been in the electrical delivery business. Most municipalities in Colorado don't do electricity. They're rural electric co-ops that deliver most of that. So anyhow, we've had some seasoned members who have been in the broadband business. We did a regional plan and then brought on a coordinator, somebody to provide technical assistance across the region. Nate Wolowitz has been in that role now for a number of years with us. And what's great with Nate's role is he's able to assist at no additional cost to our members, those communities that want to explore how they might play a role in improving broadband locally. And each one has taken a bespoke approach to that. There really isn't a single way this is delivered or a single purpose. We have some communities like Vail really just wanted cheaper, more robust broadband to serve mainly themselves and their hospital, and others like the town of Eagle, just up the road on I-70, went from sort of, we want to just replace at the municipal building having a large carrier serve us, and we want to be on this network, so we have some levers to pull, to, in the course of a year of thinking about this and being involved, actually wanting to deliver municipal broadband. So Project THOR really came out of discussions with these different localities doing their projects, and we provided help with RFPs and how you navigate the landscape of this industry, and come to find out that a lot of these local projects just don't have robust, affordable middle mile going to them. And that's really the origin of Project THOR.
Yes. One of the things that I love about the way you approach that is to discuss the local groups, because Colorado, I think, has been one of the best states for allowing solutions to bubble up that actually fit the local circumstances, because people on the ground are developing them rather than having the state come up with a solution and sort of imposing it on people. Let me just ask Evan to tell us a little bit about what Project THOR is doing, because if there's one thing I know from more than 10 years of discussing these kinds of networks, the first thing people assume is it's connecting people in their homes. What is Project THOR accomplishing today now that it's lit?
Well, first and foremost, Project THOR does not go to people's homes or even to businesses for that matter. Project THOR is a middle mile transport network. And that's really all that it is, and that's what it was meant to be. What John was mentioning is there were a number of broadband projects throughout this region, and everyone was taking a slightly different approach, as communities normally do. But the one thing that each community needed or needs with whatever their broadband approach is quality middle mile. So really, when we started looking at each of these communities and their needs, what ended up happening is we went around and talked to each individual community, and ultimately we designed and engineered THOR to just provide resilient connectivity in and out of each community. So the entire project THOR is built on various ring architecture, and all of those rings essentially terminate down in Denver at one of the major internet hubs. And that allows us to provision network transport services in an open access fashion to each of these communities so that they can get the transport down to Denver. And then at Denver, they can interconnect with whatever upstream carriers they so choose. We've also provided a kind of a default connection if they don't have an existing carrier through Mammoth Networks, where we are already interconnected with several upstream carriers and have a blended product there that folks can connect to. And we've even taken it as far to say, hey, as aggregated demand increases across the network, we'll continue to provide a lower cost of that IP transit down in Denver to all of the communities that are connected through Mammoth there. So really, the separation, Northwest COG is the network owner, and it's a transport network in and out of each of the member communities. And it's open access. What we've done is we've created some terms. Everybody loves terms. Each community that is on Project THOR has what we are calling a Meet Me Center, and that's really where that local community meets the transport. It's kind of akin to a train station, so to speak, where you can get on and off Project THOR. And then we've left it up to each local community to take that middle mile and that connectivity and interconnect with either their anchor institutions, other ISPs, or, as John mentioned, some are doing their own Muni-type network.
We actually did an interview with Tim Miles several years ago about the Meet Me Room that is another one of those solutions that bubbled up and I think has been very important. But people can get more background on that there. We'll have a link to that on the show page associated with the show. But John, I want to ask you, one of the things that I think people also may assume is that these are areas in which there was no broadband. But, Yampa Valley has been building, the Electric Association there has been building a network. Many of these communities had some form of access. You have, as part of the project, you have a healthcare organization. I think they already had some access, but it wasn't good enough, is my understanding. There were some problems with it.
I want to correct that a little bit. So Yampa Valley Electric, they are served by Project THOR. They are serving the community of Craig, Colorado, is just launching broadband services. So they are new to the broadband business. And they also serve Steamboat Springs, and we're a partner in NCB, Northwest Colorado Broadband, the Tim Miles, who's from the school district project you're talking about, where that community had anchor institutions, the municipality, the county, the school district, and a couple other key partners who got together and just said, hey, incumbent serving this isolated community, you're going to negotiate with all of us. We're a co-op, and we're going to pool our money. And they did their own fiber loop. And really that was a lot of the origin of sort of, the genius of THOR is it is a co-op, a coalition of the willing. But you're right. Almost every one of our communities, I think a good exception might be Red Cliff, and there's been some good news about that. They did not have any internet service or cell service, and they're not directly served by THOR, but we did help them get that, serve their small community. Almost every one of the communities in this part of Colorado has some level of service. And I think the crux there is this is a really difficult part of the state, like a lot of the West, to serve. I mean, the critical mass of people, customers, if you will, is really spread out. Now we're concentrated in these communities, but even the communities oftentimes have hills and valleys and aren't sort of like growing out from a core center. And so, with respect, it's a difficult region to serve. And so, complaints over the years were lack of investment. Oftentimes service would go out and be out for periods of time, and then costly service compared to urban areas. So yes, most of these communities have at least one incumbent provider, and some of them, like Breckenridge, are served by multiple and still wanted to be involved in this because a variety of reasons.
Evan, I'm curious about the cost, because I feel like if we're talking to someone and saying, well, we're going to build, I should say, we're going to establish more than 400 miles of network across some of the most expensive areas to build in the United States. And you'd say, yes, it's going to cost you $2.6 million. You might be surprised at how little that is. How does that work out?
Well, so we took a different approach. So what we looked at is we said, hey, these are all of the different communities that would like to be on Project THOR. And we really started peeling back the layers on what network infrastructure exists, who owns it, how we could use it perhaps in a different fashion than it's being used today, And to be honest, the engineering was a little bit of a challenge as we were trying to figure out which communities wanted to participate, which communities didn't want to participate. It was a continually changing game with engineering and cost modeling. So as we finalized the list of communities that we wanted to include in Project THOR, we ended up with 12 official Meet Me centers that were hosted by 10 different entities. A couple of those entities have multiple Meet Me centers. And we utilized existing network resources from various different carriers and entities to stitch together the network that is Project THOR. Really, there was not an existing carrier that had the entire infrastructure that we wanted, and they weren't certainly using it in a way that was going to provide the resilient services that we needed. So most of the network has been built using dark fiber elements that we've been able to obtain. One of our major partners was the Colorado Department of Transportation that provided dark fibers along the I-70 route. But we do have other fibers that Mammoth was able to obtain through other carriers such as Strata Networks, CenturyLink, Comcast has some elements, even Zayo has a piece in this network. So what we did is we used different, I call them puzzle pieces, to essentially build this network that most of it existed today, but just not in this manner. So keeping the costs down was a huge element in the success of this. And it allowed us to focus on getting some grant dollars and using that, namely for some local builds to connect to those elements, as well as the electronics that are needed to light the network in certain areas. So that's essentially how we were able to do what we did on such a tight budget.
And John, I'm curious how the Northwest COG actually was able to come up with the money. I never want to miss an opportunity to praise DOLA and the matching grants from the Department of Local Affairs of the state.
You know, Evan referred to the sort of evolving nature of who we like to call it the coalition of the willing, right? So we have, 28 member jurisdictions, 10 of whom bought into this project. And interestingly enough, we talked about how the projects are designed with different purposes locally. They also have different local champions, So in Grand County, the real need and the folks that sort of gravitated to us in this project were the two medical centers. It's one medical center, but in two locations. And some of them were cities or municipalities, and some of them were counties. And as you alluded to earlier, Yapa Valley Electric, which is serving Craig, Colorado, probably the most furthest out on the loop away from Denver. We didn't know as we were moving forward, it's kind of, we hit different points when we had, are you in with a letter of interest? We'll take that letter of interest to DOLA as sort of a promise and go seek a grant. Are you in with a contract, right? Which is assuring money. And, during each sort of round of that, the group just slightly shifted and changed. And of course, from Evan's standpoint, having to engineer the network, it mattered a lot. We had a running spreadsheet that Evan put together, Mammoth Networks put together, where we could show if this community drops out, and they weren't equal numbers, right? Then the costs go up for everybody else monthly here, or the startup costs. But so we took this group that we sort of came together, and we try to help stay together with the promise of an investment, and took that to DOLA and got $1 million grant from DOLA for this basically $2.6 million project. And that's the infrastructure that Evan was referring to, including some reduced costs. The main part of our backbone, 178 miles of the 400 miles, is on Colorado Department of Transportation fiber. So negotiating a favorable public entity to public entity rate for fiber that they already had that they weren't using really helped make this project possible and kept the monthly costs down. Roughly half of the cost. We had a second grant actually that helped pay from DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, that helped pay for 3 years of the first part of our rolling agreement with CDOT. That was another, $270,000. It was awarded for 270, ended up being 250 and change was what it was actually billed for. So, yeah, we've cobbled together financing from local jurisdictions because DOLA, the state, always wants to have skin in the game, and it's 50% local match or more to go get those state dollars. That's really where the financing came from, was these local agencies and grant dollars. And we really played the aggregator, the organizer, the facilitator at Northwest COG to that. We don't have any COG money, so to speak, lots of time, but we don't have any COG dollars into the project.
If we could solve a lot of problems with this low expenditure, we wouldn't have a broadband program. You've done a great job of figuring out how to thread this all together and make it work. I wanted to just touch on the operating expenses. How are the ongoing expenses going to be paid for?
Yeah, so they're paid for through a contract with each of the local jurisdictions. And so they're paying a monthly fee to basically maintain the infrastructure and for the most part, pay the operator to do their work. Northwest COG is not taking a cut out of it. One thing we will have to add in is as we get more partners and it becomes a little more robust, to start covering the cost or part of the cost of our coordinator, our director, broadband director's time. But right now he's covered separately through another program.
It's really unique when you take these 10 entities and you bring them together and you put them into this cooperative type model. What we've essentially done is we've taken those operating costs and we've divvied them up based on size of Meet Me Center and a couple other metrics. And we've actually got this down to a point where it's like each entity has a share in THOR. We've even developed a model with allocating bandwidth across the network where they can trade shares, so to speak. If one entity is not using enough capacity, or the capacity that they have excess capacity, they can quote unquote sell those shares to the next entity. So it's a really unique model. When you start talking about bringing that many entities together, it's not an easy task, number one. But number two, it's a great group, and they discuss on a biweekly steering committee calls, essentially the operations and how this network is going to continue to evolve.
One of the other things that this project has accomplished is something that's fairly unique in my experience, which is Ron Rizzuto, a professor at the University of Denver, who, in my experience, has never taken a position that is opposed to the incumbent interests. Someone who is as opposed to municipal networks as he is unencumbered by facts relating to municipal networks. He praised this and said that he thought this is a good example of government stepping up and taking care of something the private sector wasn't going to do. And so I was very glad to see that. At the same time, in the same article actually, by Tamara Chung from the now the Colorado Sun, who's just one of the best broadband reporters in the nation at the local level, she quoted CenturyLink, who takes a different view. And I want to ask you about this, Evan. CenturyLink says the new network, quote, does not add any significant route diversity and, unfortunately, does not provide the last mile facilities needed to deliver broadband to rural Colorado consumers and businesses. Saying that we hope that future taxpayer-funded projects are focused on meeting the needs of unserved and underserved Coloradans rather than competing with existing facilities and networks. And so I'm just curious if you can respond to that. It seems like maybe we didn't need to do any of this work.
Well, Chris, as we mentioned earlier on, the intent of THOR is not to provide that last mile access. It is a middle mile network transport network, and the last mile access is handled by the local communities themselves. So, again, just for clarity's sake, that's what THOR is, and that's the intention of THOR. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we've created the redundancy that we want on this network. There have been far too many times where a single fiber cut impacts an entire community. We've had 911 services impacted due to fiber cuts that are on the incumbent's network. And, this is just the fuel for the fire, so to speak, in really determining the need for this. We also have some communities where we know that CenturyLink fiber is single-threaded, and we've used alternate carriers to get to those communities. So, certainly CenturyLink has stepped up recently in some communities. We know that. Is that a result of Project THOR or these different efforts? Maybe. Even if it is, we'll call that a win. But, ultimately, this is the network that the communities wanted, and it was designed using various elements that do include CenturyLink elements, but for the most part, want to complement what CenturyLink has so that there's true resiliency across the region.
I think it's important to note. I mean, one of the things that we've seen is Comcast is expanding in some of these areas too, and it's not clear that what necessarily the role is, if that would have happened otherwise, or what their decision making is. But Project THOR is not something that's meant to harm those companies, right? I mean, I think sometimes we see these and we feel like, oh, well, CenturyLink's opposed, there must be some sort of conflict there. But a project like Project THOR, this is about building a foundation that anyone can then build off of, right? I mean, that's the thing that it provides, because CenturyLink is not able to prioritize the kind of investments in rural Colorado that we may want to see in rural Colorado. So, I want to make sure that this is something where we're like saying CenturyLink sucks. No one's saying that. You're using part of CenturyLink fiber. They want to suggest, I feel like, that there's no need for this. And so, John, I want to come back to you quick, because one of the things that I read was that there was healthcare implications for the lack of reliability you had before. And I'm just curious, do you want to tell us any stories from Northwest COG about why greater resiliency and redundancy was particularly important?
And Tamara used the quote from the chair of Middle Park Health when we went up and met with their board, and this is a little over a year ago, and talking about whether they, would tie into Project THOR. These rural hospitals are not, if you will, full service hospitals, so they have to really pick and choose what services they can and they can afford to provide. And so one of the things that is a challenge is a good bit of their imaging, they have the tools there, but the specialists who are then assessing, those images, and the doctor who was quoted in Tamara's story was talking about a stroke victim, for instance, where the clock is really, really ticking, and they need to send this image over the internet to their specialists elsewhere and get, assessment, and then get told back what they should do, and how regular outages, and then if they had to go to their backup system, how it went from being timely to life and death. So the drama of that, I think, just underscored for us how important it is. And we know rural hospitals are struggling these days financially, and we also know how critical they are to delivery of healthcare. That is something we're really proud of, having Middle Park Health be a partner and have 2 locations on the network.
Yes, and I would just say, as we're wrapping up, I've been doing more thinking about telehealth a lot lately. Who hasn't? $2.6 million and $1 million operating costs per year. You don't have to have a lot of medical benefits from that to justify that just from medical benefits.
Sure. And I want to go back to the incumbent discussion. You're right. We're not set out to beat any of the incumbents, if you will, but we are there to provide some competition. And I've listened to too many meetings with end users in community I live in Eagle, complaining about their services, and I can't explain why they are as they are. And CenturyLink will send people up and listen. But there's a lot of frustration in these communities, and what happens to the people who are elected officials who are, have convened these meetings with their citizens and with incumbents, they realize really they don't have a lever to pull, to say, hey, would you step up to the plate? In some places they have, Mammoth is a good example, and some other networks in some other locations that Evan could talk about, where among others, sort of the smaller, hungrier ISPs, if you will, that have a conversation with the community of, we could deliver this if you helped us with that. If we had that tower location, or you built this fiber here. So those conversations are going on. They just don't really happen very much in these smaller communities with the big incumbents. And so they're kind of a black box. They're kind of a black box of, we don't know where their funding, was spent from the federal government to invest in these communities, to serve underserved communities and rural communities. We don't know what their plans are. We don't know, if they're heading towards de-investing, or if we know they're investing in the next generation, in the urban centers, and understand from a market standpoint that. But so there isn't that kind of transparency. This project allows these local governments to actually have a lever to pull to hopefully affect the quality of service, however they can do that, with whatever partners come to the table and make the most sense. And that's the exciting thing for these communities, is that they're not just sitting back at this critical infrastructure, which is what broadband is these days, and just waiting, without anything more than broad assurances. They're able to actually act. If the incumbents step up to the plate and improve services, great. We cheer for that. So I wanted to give that thought about our relationship with this project to the incumbents.
I'm glad you did, and I feel like that's a very good place to wrap up. So let me thank you, John. Thank you, Evan. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I'm so thankful for the work you've done for Northwestern Colorado.
Thank you, Christopher. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a ton.
That was Christopher talking with John Stavney and Evan Biaggi. We have transcripts for this and other podcasts available at muninetworks.org/broadbandbits. Email us at podcast@muninetworks.org with your ideas for the show. Follow Chris on Twitter. His handle is @CommunityNets. Follow muninetworks.org stories on Twitter. The handle is @muninetworks. Subscribe to this and the other podcasts from ILSR, Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. You can access them anywhere you get your podcasts. You can catch the latest important research from all of our initiatives if you subscribe to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount keeps us going. Thank you to Arne Hughesby for the song Warm Duck Shuffle, licensed through Creative Commons. This was episode 406 of the Community Broadband Bits podcast. Thanks for listening.